I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Monday. We're going to be talking a little bit about what we saw at the Combine that took place last week and over the weekend. And there is plenty of news out there. But first, Dennis, how was your weekend?
It was good. The boy had a basketball tournament on Friday. You know, they made a great run, but they got beat pretty good in the third game. So it's a rec league. And the general idea is you're giving all the kids a chance to play. Unfortunately, the team we went up against in the finals decided they were only going to let two players touch the ball. And so they kind of used their two best players. We didn't play great even as a team. We've got several players that can score. It was the ball wasn't falling for us. It just happens. Game 2 was thrilling. It was a 20-20 tie, and one of our guys got fouled with 1 second left. He made one of two shots, and our team erupted and rushed the floor, and we got called for a technical foul. The kid on the other team missed both shots. I can only imagine what kind of therapy that 12-year-old is in today. Literally, he missed his shot. He just threw himself on the floor. I felt so bad for him.
You got to love rec sports, though.
You got to make those free throws, man.
It starts early with the fundamentals. A little baby Shaq out there, just a wing and a prayer. Well, before we dive into the Combine, there was actually surprisingly a lot of news, much of it breaking today. The deadline for franchise tagging is Wednesday, so it makes sense that a lot of this is starting to come down to the wire because this time next week is the legal tampering period as we get ready for all the fun to start. But some teams aren't waiting.
First big piece. Legal tampering led to my second marriage.
Oh my. It's probably going to lead to a lot of second marriages for players out there too, maybe a few thirds. But the first big piece of news that broke today is Derek Carr. We knew over the Combine weekend, he met with a few teams at the Combine. Looks like he is going to be signing with the Saints. Reportedly will be a 4-year, $150 million deal, which is under the $40 million a year we've seen some of these other quarterbacks going for, possibly as much as $70 million guaranteed. So, Dennis, what does that mean for the Saints? Do you think it's a good fit? And what do you think it means for Jameis Winston, who is still under contract there?
Well, I think the Saints now have the best quarterback in the NFC South. I would like to see Jameis get a shot. I'm not sure what doesn't work for Dennis Allen when it comes to Jameis Winston. He basically named Jameis the starter, and as soon as he could find a reason, put Dalton in. Now, Dalton played reasonably well. There wasn't a ton of difference, honestly, between Dalton and Derek Carr. But Dennis Allen was they were in Oakland at the time when Derek Carr was drafted. They have a history. It makes sense. The deal, it's good if Carr plays well, they got a pretty good deal. And if he doesn't, they can get out of it in 2 years. So I think it made sense for both sides. Carr gets to keep his no trade clause. So essentially, if they decide they want to get rid of him after 2 years, they're going to have to cut him to do it unless they let him choose where he gets traded to. And we saw he'd rather get cut so he can go make his own deal and do the choosing that way. I think Jameis gets cut tomorrow. You know, I thought the deadline was 4:00 tomorrow for franchise tags.
I thought they said it was March 8th, which, if I'm correct, would be Wednesday.
Yeah.
So the report that came out today is if Jameis Winston gets released tomorrow, they have $11.5 million dead cap and save $4 million. If he gets cut after June 1st, they save $12.5 million against the cap. So my guess would be he is cut, but not until June.
Well, they'll designate him as a June 1 cut. I'm not sure how early they can actually cut them and make that designation. You know, they don't have to actually wait until June.
I think they do for them to sign other places.
Yeah, it's weird. Some of those rules they have, like legal tampering.
So that's what I saw is that he will be released after June 1st.
So I feel like he's going to get a shot to go somewhere. There's definitely more starting jobs than there are good quarterbacks, and so I think he'll get a chance to go somewhere and compete for a job. You know, Seattle just locked up Geno. I saw on my way home.
Yeah, that's next up on the.
And so, to me, Winston. I don't know where he goes. We'll have to see how it shakes out, because if he can't do anything till after June 1st, you know, clearly we'll get the draft. We'll see what happens there. You know, does he do something like go to Arizona where he knows it may only be 8 games, but he's going to get the shot to play with some good players and maybe have a shot to set himself up for next year? I don't know. I think Jameis got a raw deal last year.
Maybe he's been okay at times, but it hasn't been great in New Orleans. I kind of think he's going to be consigned to going somewhere to be a backup, which isn't a terrible deal considering the rate that we go through quarterbacks in the NFL. I do like the Carr signing. You know, the NFC South, probably the advantage there is the division is wide open. If they can retain some of their defensive pieces, I liked Chris Olave. A lot to be determined with Alvin Kamara. Last I saw the legal process likely to play out, they said sometime in July, which doesn't leave them a lot of margin. Supposedly they're going to rework the deal and bring back Michael Thomas, you know, for the 2 quarters this next season that he's available. Hopefully he'll be able to make an impact. But they have some pieces. I was just surprised a little bit because it seemed like the Saints are constantly have been in cap hell. I'd like to know where they're getting this $150 million, but
Mickey Loomis is a wizard.
He's something. The second piece of news, as you alluded to, it sounds like the Seahawks have got their man in Geno Smith. It sounds like they're looking at a 3-year, $105 million deal. How does that strike you, Dennis, and what does that mean for the Seahawks?
Well, Geno and Pete Carroll both said that they wanted him to stay in Seattle. So it felt like they wanted to get something done. Pete liked what Geno did last year. I know he faded down the stretch. We'll see, you know, a full healthy year of Kenneth Walker. You know, they've got some weapons at tight end, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. They finally drafted a stud offensive lineman last year. Maybe they dip in and get another offensive lineman this year and kind of shore that up. I think Pete wants to play a relatively safe type of football, and Geno will play that, especially, you know, now he's 34 years old, I think. So
I'll look it up.
he's signed $100 million contract to basically go and spend the rest of his career in Seattle and retire very comfortably, get some redemption for being on the bench for 6 or 7 years, 8 years, whatever it was. So I like the deal for both Geno and I like it for Seattle because it does give them some certainty.
He's 32. He was born
32.
in October of 1990, so he'll be 32 when the season starts.
So, he'll be 35 at the end of the contract. If he wants to keep playing, he'll probably be able to be. If he doesn't, he can go and get on with the rest of his career with a nice, handsome bank account.
Yeah, it's not bad. He seemed to be a good fit for what they're doing. I think the important thing for them was they found Ken Walker, and Ken Walker looks like the real deal for them because they are a team that during Pete Carroll's time have been better when they've had a solid, reliable, dominant running back to rely on. He seemed to do well with Metcalf and Lockett. It's got to be good news for them. He has Noah Fant there still, and Will Dissly. You've got some weapons around them. And Seattle was competitive, made the playoffs. It's still going to be a very tough division, but I think it's a decent shot. It's to go from where we were last year, where Geno Smith was supposedly the backup to Drew Lock going into the season, to him signing a $105 million deal is a pretty big success story. I had said before, I thought in Dynasty he'd be a reliable kind of QB2 guy for 1 to 2 years. I don't know if I'm all in on playing 3 full years, but we'll see what happens. We'll see how the Seahawks play it. I really think that means their top 5 draft pick that they have, they'll either be content to trade back or they're going to get some kind of probably a defensive player, knowing Pete Carroll. Or if they were smart, an offensive lineman, but knowing Pete Carroll, they'll get some kind of defensive player.
Right.
Another piece of news, Calvin Ridley officially reinstated for the Jaguars after his year-long suspension. We have not seen him in about a year and a half. Jags made that trade looking forward to 2023. How do you feel now that he's officially reinstated?
I think it's a good opportunity for him. Trevor Lawrence is a really good quarterback. Ridley is a great route runner. He's older, and he came into the league as an old prospect. He played pretty high level, but he did miss some games, which kind of kept his overall wide receiver X number pretty low. I think he only had like one top 24. Good Jones. Then you add in Trevor Etienne or Travis Etienne franchise, and they basically have the band back together. And they upgraded, in my opinion, over an aging Marvin Jones. So I'm looking for the Jaguars in general to take a step forward. I think Ridley will be their leading receiver. I don't know if that means he's going to get enough volume to be a wide receiver 1 or a high-end wide receiver 2, the way that Christian Kirk and Zay Jones performed last year. They're likely to cannibalize each other, but I could see all 3 of them finishing between, say, 20 and 35.
Yeah, we'll have to see how the layoff impacts him. The good news is he gets like a full off season, all preseason and everything to work in. And, he's had time with this franchise to learn a little bit about the Jaguars and to be part of that team. But if we get anything close to what Ridley was when he went out, I think he's going to be a number 1 for the Jaguars. I'll be curious to see. We're going to next week at some point, we start getting into our wide receiver rankings. I'll be curious to see where he lands for all of us in Dynasty. Probably one of the more interesting names. And if you held him the last 2 years and kind of rode everything out or acquired some shares, you have to be pretty excited about this news. Now we're going to turn to some franchise tag hot stove. The report is out that the Giants plan to tag Daniel Jones if they can't get a deal done before the deadline. Supposedly Jones is asking for 48 million a year. It just keeps getting higher. Before it was 45, now it's 48. And the Giants are supposedly willing to go as high as 40 million over 4 years. And Dennis, the 40 million kind of leaked out there. I am kind of surprised that they were willing to make a 40 million 4-year commitment. If I'm them and Jones is there, I think franchise tag is probably the way to go. But what do you think about that? And what do you think it means for Barkley? Should they just turn all their attention toward Barkley now and see if they can get something done?
I think they will, but the reports are that the Giants and Barkley are pretty far apart as well. And I think the Giants are making the decision that, well, if Jones won't sign what we think is a fair agreement, then we will franchise tag him, and we'll see what happens in the market next year. Because, to be fair, I don't know what he's proved in just 1 year. Now, I think there's certainly some expectation that he's on the right path under Brian Daboll, but I don't think if he was to get I think 40 million was a stretch, and I think that it comes
especially
down
over 4 years. That'd be a bigger contract than Carr.
Yeah, and granted, he's 8 years younger than Carr or something like that, 6 years younger than Carr. So I don't know that it's out of line, but I feel like if that hadn't leaked, I think they would have been pushing hard on, let's go 38, let's go 38.5. Maybe we'll give you a little more guarantee or something over what Derek Carr got. But to me, it makes sense for them to say, well, we're going to prioritize the quarterback over the running back because the quarterback is the premium position. And it's the right business decision to make based on where they pick, what the free agent quarterback draft pool looks like. And to me, it's almost like Daniel Jones is – I get betting on yourself, but he's kind of shooting himself in the foot. He's going to make them franchise tag him, which is going to cause them to let Saquon Barkley walk. Now he's going to get a weaker running back. Maybe he gets somebody that is good, but Saquon Barkley is pretty dang good. So it may backfire on Daniel Jones, and he ends up with just the 1 year 32.2, and then he goes next year and he's fighting for a job on the street somewhere.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Jones' management team must see something, because every time they talk about what he's looking for, it gets higher and higher. Another one to watch will be Lamar Jackson, who, they said it's going to come down to the deadline. I expect both those quarterbacks are going to get franchise tagged. In terms of Barkley, yeah, it's probably discouraging. They're far apart. The Giants weren't sure about either of those guys going into the season. They had a pretty magical season, and both of them worked really well with the new coach. Ironically, it seems like there's some traction that a lot of people think, especially with Jacobs getting tagged, which we'll talk about in a minute, that Barkley could be a candidate to go to Buffalo. It would be interesting to see him stay in the same state. But there was a lot of hope and optimism the Giants could bring both of them back, and it's starting to look more and more like they're only going to get one. We mentioned some franchise tags. 2 running backs did officially get tagged. The first is Tony Pollard. We'll get to him in a minute. The second is Josh Jacobs. And Dennis, I'm going to reiterate, the Raiders are a poorly run franchise. I literally cannot believe it's come to this. But how do you feel about this situation?
Man, Josh Jacobs had a great season last year. And you're right, the Raiders botched it by not picking up his 5th-year option. But I don't know that there was a ton of evidence that suggested they should, mostly because of the way he had been used going into last season. And it's easy for us to sit here in hindsight and say, oh, they definitely should have picked up the option. But based on the replaceability of the running back position, and how he had performed his first 3 years, which were good, but maybe not necessarily worthy of picking up the 5th-year option. It looks like they were complete and utter morons at this point. Now they're, and they're just doubling down by franchise tagging him. But he knows the offense. They know that he's going to be able to carry the ball, catch the ball. They've got a rock solid running back for next season, and they don't have to, they can work on developing Zamir White more this year. They can add another mid-round back to the mix that maybe can step up next year. Their real problem is going to be at quarterback, because right now it almost looks like the answer is going to be Jarrett Stidham. I know there's some talk about Jimmy Garoppolo going there, but
I think they're one of the teams. So this is Aaron Rodgers is a domino that you have to get an answer about sooner rather than later, I think, or else one of these teams, and it could end up being the Raiders, is going to pin their hopes on that and wait and get hammered, because now, with Carr going to the Saints, the Jets, the Raiders, the Buccaneers, all teams that potentially could compete with a quarterback that don't have one. And none of those teams are in great position to do that in the draft. So maybe you're right about Andy Dalton's going to start somewhere.
I mean, we could see Dalton and Winston starting somewhere this season.
Winston, I do feel bad for him, because the post June 1st one is kind of a tough blow, because you're right. Free agency will have been going for a long time. You'll also have gone through the draft, and you're basically going to end up in some kind of position. The other place I forgot that's still trying to figure out a quarterback is the Colts. They may try to see if they can get up to draft one, but they potentially have a core that could compete too. So it's going to be interesting. There's still a lot of teams. I still find it hard to believe that Washington is just ready to rock and roll with Sam Howell and no other plan B or plan 1A.
My question is that if the Colts stay put at 4 and somebody leaps them and Young and Stroud are gone, do the Colts take Levis or Richardson?
Well, we'll get to Richardson in a minute. I think he's vaulting up. The one that I feel like is going to have to put all their chips in on jumping up in the draft is the Panthers, who finished surprisingly in good position in terms of almost making the playoffs, but in bad position for what seemed like we fired our coach midseason. We really need to rebuild in the draft. So they haven't been able to attract a free agent, and I'm sure Frank Reich wants something. There are other questions out there. Will Matt Ryan get traded again? It's starting to look like Baker Mayfield actually may get into a starting position, may not have to take a backup job. So it's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks, because there's a lot of quarterback dominoes, and we've seen the first couple of fall taking a couple of places off the board, but that makes it even more interesting, in my opinion. The other back that got the franchise tag is Tony Pollard. Dallas committing to there. I think this almost certainly means they'll probably lose Dalton Schultz. But what do you think it also means for Ezekiel Elliott?
I think Zeke has already made it known that he's willing to restructure. And as far as Dalton Schultz goes, Jake Ferguson came in and played really, really well. They like Peyton Hendershot a lot. I think Sean McKeon they've got as a blocking tight end. So there's plenty of depth in Dallas at the tight end position. Their real issue is wide receiver 2, because Gallup, after he returned from his injury, just didn't step up like he needed to and take that role. So it looks like he's going to be set as the wide receiver 3, but they need a wide receiver 2. And it's a fairly weak wide receiver class and a weak wide receiver free agent class. So I'm not sure where they're going to get that wide receiver 2 that they need. that being said, with Zeke's willingness to kind of restructure, I could see him staying around. I do think that it kind of takes franchising. Pollard does take, drafting Bijan Robinson if he's available there off the board. Theoretically, but it is Jerry Jones, and if Bijan Robinson is there, he might just draft him.
Oh, Jerry, play the good old wishbone. Well, we started talking a little bit about rookies, so let's move over and talk a little bit about the NFL Combine. First, I ask you about a couple of people who either impressed or who drew some attention. First, I think we've got to start with Anthony Richardson. You talked about if the Colts are sitting there at 4, do they go for him? Anthony Richardson put up some monster numbers in the measurables. What do you think that did for his stock?
I got to be honest. If you were not aware that Anthony Richardson was a phenomenal athlete, be the comment. Even me, who doesn't watch a ton of college football outside of the Buckeyes, was aware that Anthony Richardson was a great athlete. I was listening to Sirius XM NFL on my way home, and Pat Kerwin, they were talking about Anthony Richardson, and he said, look, he is a former scout, been a front office guy in the NFL, and he said, when we draft a college quarterback into the NFL, we expect him to have a 10% drop in completion percentage. And Anthony Richardson was a 54%, I think 54.7% completion, 53.8% completion percentage in his only season as a starter for the Florida Gators. He had a 17-9 touchdown to interception ratio. Is he a great athlete? Yes. Does he have a strong arm? Yes. Do you want to put somebody out there that's going to complete 49% of their passes? No. Now, somebody's going to buy in. Somebody's going to say, look, I can fix this guy. I'm going to make him an NFL quarterback. And in the interviews I saw with Richardson, he seemed like a super nice guy, sounded like a super hard worker, but he just didn't get a ton of playing time until his senior season. He only attempted 66 passes prior to last year, his sophomore season, redshirt sophomore season. I want him to be successful, but if you're drafting him in the top 5 picks, you're drafting him to a bad team. He needs to go into the NFL and sit a little bit. Now, can he go and maybe do Justin Fields? He looks like he run like Fields does. I don't know if that wins NFL games. And NFL coaches, unlike fantasy players, they draft players to win games as opposed to us. We draft players to score fantasy points. So I want him to be successful. He's a super high ceiling, roll of the dice. And since Josh Allen was successful, there are a lot of people out there that think they can duplicate what happened with Josh Allen. And I'm just not 100% sold. Richardson, like I had a top 2, and it was Stroud and Young, and Richardson, Levis, and Hooker. And I think Hooker is probably the most fundamentally sound of all of them, has the best, most well-rounded game. But everybody shook on him because he's 25 years old. And that makes sense because not a lot of quarterbacks have come into the NFL at 25 years old and developed into, Pro Bowl quarterbacks. But if I have to win games in 2023, I think I want Hooker over Richardson. And if he can win games in 23, then he can win games in 24 and probably 25. So I see why people would gamble on Anthony Richardson, but the 40-yard dash, the broad jump, and the vertical don't have a lot of relevance on playing quarterback in the NFL. So he threw the ball okay. He didn't throw the ball as well as Stroud. Young didn't throw at all, which was, to me, quite the business decision, not throwing the
I
ball.
believe his pro day is like in a week and a half.
I get it. The way C.J. Stroud threw the ball and the power that Will Levis and Richardson threw the ball, to me, it seemed like he was scared to stand up there at 5'10" next to these big guys and throw the ball. But again, I have an Ohio State bias that I freely admit. I like Richardson. I'm going to be nervous drafting him.
And it's hard to tell, too, because we've seen the last few years, you always have some guys that have these eye-popping, like, measurables at the combine. It gets everybody talking in March. But by the time you get to the end of April and you get to the draft, that doesn't always translate into going somewhere. But I have been kind of pondering Richardson since we heard our friend Matt talk about the potential upside. And I think given this quarterback landscape, depending on what happens the next couple of weeks and the teams that are out there looking, I think if you don't get Stroud or Young and you're feeling a little desperate, you might roll the dice. And there are a lot of young coaches or coaches that have a lot to prove that are going to be going into 2023. And I'm starting to think he's going to end up landing somewhere like that. You mentioned Bryce Young. He didn't throw, but he did get measured. And as you mentioned, he came in below 6 feet. A lot was made about he's going to be a smaller quarterback. Do you think anything that happened this weekend substantially changes people's minds? Do you think he's still in contention for the number 1 overall pick?
Yeah, I think he is. Now, he's an accurate thrower of the football, and he moves around in the pocket really well, finds passing lanes. He weighed in 10 pounds more than he was listed, so he was obviously bulking up. I say obviously, but maybe he really is 204. He was listed at 194, and until he weighed in, he's always he wore a lot of loose fitting clothes at the combine. In every picture I saw him, he had a maybe a size too big hoodie on to, cover up how skinny he is. But he looked, he much like Richardson's athletic ability. If you couldn't look at Bryce Young and see that's a little dude, then I don't know what to tell you, because I'm not terribly surprised. I figured 5'11", 5'10", and an 8 was a little smaller than even I expected. Almost 2 full inches below what was listed. So, he's going to rely on his instincts. He's going to rely on his ability to make the throws. Will it translate to the next level? We see for all of the things Kyler Murray has been able to accomplish, when you get deep into his numbers, for a little guy, Murray isn't quite the passer that the reputation he has sort of puts out there. And I don't know if Young will be able to overcome that and get to that elite level fantasy producer level in the NFL. I like him a lot. I like Young. Like I have Stroud 1. I think it's because he's a better passer, not just because it's an Ohio State thing. Young might have a little more escapability than Stroud. Stroud doesn't look to run at all. I think he looked to he took running opportunities literally in one game in his entire career, it seemed, and that was against Georgia. And that would seem like it was like, hey, let me show you. I really can do it. I just don't, kind of approach. But no, I like Bryce Young. 7 times out of 10, I'm probably going to go C.J. Stroud over Bryce Young, though.
it would let me unmute. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you. We already knew he was going to be small. He came in maybe a little bit smaller than people thought. I think he's still, we've basically talked about Stroud and Young being the top two quarterback options. There's enough teams that have need. He's going somewhere in there. I still think the Texans really want Bryce Young, and that's why they're investigating whether they need to move up to number one or they can get him at number two. It's going to be fascinating to see how it goes. It feels much more certain this year than last year, certainly, that we're going to see a couple of quarterbacks go right at the top of the draft, and probably at least 3, maybe 4 somewhere in the first round, just based on how people feel about these guys. It wasn't all about quarterbacks, though. One of the other big storylines is Kayshon Boutte, who's a wide receiver that there have been some questions about even prior to this. Did not have a stunning combine in terms of measurables. I think his final official time in the 40 was 4.5, but I saw one unofficial time that he ran first was 4.76. Didn't have great measurables in the other categories. Do you think it hurt him, this performance at the combine?
Yeah, he didn't do great last season to begin with, and to end up kind of having just this very mediocre performance, only 5'11", 195, just an okay 10-yard split. A poor vertical jump. I mean, only 29-inch vertical and a 9-foot 10-inch broad jump. You need to kind of now it's like, what's he hang his hat on? There were times where we could go, well, his numbers were down because LSU has shitty quarterbacks. Well, then you look now at his athletic ability and say, okay, well, yes, LSU had shitty quarterbacks, but was he also not getting open? Is he also, not as good at the contested catch or jump ball as he was perceived? He had around a 5, maybe under 5 relative athletic score. Shout out to Math Bomb on Twitter. I think he's going to drop. The one thing I think he has going for him is that he was close to 200 pounds, and there's a group of wide receivers after the top 3 that all weigh about 175 pounds. They're all like 5'8" to 5'10" and 175 pounds. That's Tank Dell and Marvin Mims and Zay Flowers and Josh Downs. These guys are all small, and what Boutte has is a little bit more size to him. But it wouldn't surprise me to see guys like A.T. Perry get drafted ahead of Boutte. Perry checked in. He was another guy that was 2 inches shorter than measured, but he was 6'3" and 215 pounds, and he performed pretty well. Ran in the 4.4s, 4.5s, good athletics. So there are going to be some people, I think, that get drafted over Boutte because I think maybe he's presenting, he looked unprepared for the combine, and I think that goes to how well what's his work ethic like. If he doesn't, you have to. I get it. These are some of the most talented players in the world, the best athletes. But when you get up there in that rarefied air, even the 53rd man on the roster is one of the best athletes in the world. And if you don't take it seriously coming out of college, I don't know what to tell you. And it seems kind of like Boutte didn't take this whole process quite as serious as he should have.
Yeah, and that's the tough part when you're kind of trending down as you're approaching the draft. The combine can be a time to sort of right the ship, get some excitement, or you can continue that trend. And it really feels like he sort of continued that trend. And I think back to just last year when, I think we talked about Isaiah Spiller didn't have a great combine, and then you end up seeing that sort of carry over questions ends up going later than we thought he might have, and then has kind of a lost rookie year. So it's definitely time to start getting a little bit nervous. Dennis, we talked about a few specific players, but who is one player or a couple of players that you think helped themselves the most during the weekend at the Combine?
There were a lot of athletic tight ends at the Combine this year. I heard one comment last week that attributed to Daniel Jeremiah that he thought there may be 9 tight ends drafted in the first 3 rounds. And then just kind of looking at it here, adding it up, there were 11 tight ends that ran a 4.7 or faster. Darnell Washington was every bit as impressive as he seemed to be in college. Got down on the sled at 6'7" tall. He got down on the sled and pushed it with ease. Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State and Sam Laporta out of Iowa. 2 very, very fast tight ends, 4'6", 4'5", They seem like they're going to be guys that go in the first couple rounds. So the tight ends really hit. I think Stetson Bennett cemented his spot as QB6. He threw really, really well. I think there were some people that were surprised at how strong his arm was. But he's a small guy, 5'11", 195, I think he was, or 205. And he's an older prospect. He's 24, 25 years old as well. So I think, he reminds me a little bit, drunken public issue aside, of Russell Wilson coming into the NFL. Wilson was a graduate transfer that went to Wisconsin after NC State. And Stetson Bennett just kind of came up as a walk-on and took over. Both of the guys seem to have some good maturity. And Bennett is the kind of guy I think that goes somewhere and ends up winning the job in camp because he just makes the plays. Maybe not. He makes the plays he's supposed to, and he converts enough that you don't expect that you go, oh, well, maybe we should give this guy a real shot. So I kind of liked Stetson Bennett. After a really, really poor Senior Bowl week, Chase Brown came in to the Combine and performed really well in the drills and in the athletic testing. In the Senior Bowl week, Chase Brown looked like he didn't belong. So now we have a whole year of tape on Chase Brown that looks great, then a pretty poor Senior Bowl week of practices, and then we're back at drills at the Combine, and he looks great again. So I think as people take his last 12 months kind of all into account, I think Chase Brown started to climb back up. He looked overwhelmed at the Senior Bowl, and Dan Toomey Senior Bowl Brown had picked, and the guy came in and just trucked him. And to add insult to injury, the trucked him was his twin brother Sidney down at the Senior Bowl. And to come up to Indianapolis and kind of make up the ground that he needed, I think Chase Brown kind of moved himself back into being a day 2 pick. And then a sleeper that I really like that built on his Senior Bowl week is Evan Hull out of Northwestern. 5'11", 209, 207, somewhere in that range. Super, super good in the passing game. Runs the ball pretty well. Kind of reminds me of like a Rex Burkhead type, where if he ends up getting a shot, he could come in and be a weapon in the passing game that you can also run in the 2-minute drill to keep teams honest. He's a guy I'm looking at late in my rookie drafts. If he's sitting around in the back half of the 4th round, I'm probably going to have a whole lot of Evan Hull on my rosters. Guys that I think hurt themselves a little bit, I don't think Michael Mayer did himself any favors. I don't know if hurt is the right word, but he just looked okay. He wasn't extremely athletic. He didn't run really, really good. I would have expected something a little better than a 4.7 out of him. he measured well, 6'4" and I think a half, 255 pounds, 259, 264, I think was what he was listed. So he measured okay, but to me, he just didn't stand out. It feels like from a fantasy perspective, I'm going to be looking at guys later like Luke Musgrave and Will Mallory and Sam Laporta. I think there's somebody else that I'm missing, but Dalton Kincaid. Those are the guys I'll be looking at for fantasy over Meyer. Meyer feels like a guy that's maybe going to get more snaps than some of these other guys, but he's not going to get more targets. And so I'm a little bit concerned about where he's at. Jordan Addison, I'm conflicted. I was toying with maybe moving him up over Jackson Smith and Jigba as my wide receiver 1, but he tested really, really poorly. Now, the film does not bear out how Addison tested. He barely broke 4.5, had a 5.82 relative athletic score, only 5'11" and 171 pounds. But when you watch the tape, Addison looks good. So I feel, that there's another guy I'm going to mention here, Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee, who won the Biletnikoff Award. He's 6 foot, 174 pounder. Lots of talk about running in the 4.3s. He nailed a 4.4, had a really good RAS. But when you look at what the talk about him leading up to the combine was, it doesn't seem like he lived up to it. And the offense he played in, he was never on the line of scrimmage, coming out of a lot of stacked formations. And at 174 pounds, is he going to be able to beat press coverage? And his speed not being exactly what we thought, if he gets bumped around, will that throw off the timing? Is he going to beat it? I think I'm starting to lean a little more towards, if I'm going to take a Tennessee wide receiver, I'm looking at Cedric Tillman in the middle of the third versus Jalen Hyatt in the beginning of the second, just because I think it might be a little more value. And Tillman is a bigger, stronger wide receiver, doesn't have the speed that Hyatt has. But as we've seen with guys like Keenan Allen, it's not always speed that really matters. It's getting open. There was a lot of talk about how Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's healthy, but he's not going to run the 40 because he hasn't had enough time to practice. But he destroyed everybody in the 3-cone and the 3-cone drill and the 20-yard short shuttle. He just blew people away. There was nobody even close to the numbers he put up. I expect Jackson Smith and Jigba to be open a lot short, and then teams to overcompensate, and then him to be open a lot deep because he's got enough speed.
Do you have any thoughts about the running back group?
I think in general they perform. Bijan Robinson is who we thought he was. Yeah. Jahmyr Gibbs weighed and measured almost exactly what he was listed. He's still my RB2. I am not concerned. I actually, in my very first underdog draft of the year, had a couple running backs I was looking at in the 4th round. Both of them got sniped from me. I took Jahmyr Gibbs as my RB1 in my first underdog draft. It probably isn't going to work out. I acknowledge that. But I didn't like any of the other running backs.
You're a genius.
I didn't like, and it may have even been the 5th round because I think I started off, I went Kupp, another wide receiver in the 2nd, Kyle Pitts, and then Joe Burrow and Kyle Pitts. And then I went Jahmyr Gibbs. I forget who the other wide receiver was now. But I think the running back class is going to live up to its billing. There's big backs like Zach Charbonnet who have versatility. There's a group of backs that are in that 5'9", 5'10", 205 to 209 range, Eric Gray, Chase Brown, that I think are going to come in they're not going to be bell cows, but they're going to be the not committee backs, but duo backs. I think of a committee as more than two backs. They're going to be the 1A, 1B kind of back. They'll be paired up with a guy like, Hassan Haskins in Tennessee, or, Derrick Henry when he apparently gets traded, because that's supposed to happen, or James Conner in Arizona. They're going to be guys that get paired up with these bigger backs that are able to be productive because they have the ability to catch passes, run routes, and run the ball, just maybe not carry the ball 18 to 20 times. So I like the running back class a lot. Between free agency and the draft, running back class is very heavy compared to all the other positions.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. Well, another combine is in the books. And so we will be back on Friday. Speaking of running backs, we are going to look at our top 24 dynasty running backs before we start merging in the rookies. That should be pretty interesting. Matt may or may not be with us, but at least Dennis and I will be here with our top 24 guys. So that'll be something to look forward to. And then we're getting ever closer to when we're going to go back to do a few mock drafts. We're going to do some rookie drafts. We're going to do some startup drafts. Plenty of rankings as we make our way down here. And next week, of course, we're going to have the free agent frenzy beginning. I'm sure we will have plenty to talk about starting Monday when the legal tampering period begins, and then next Friday once we have more deals in the books. So it's getting to be a pretty exciting time. But if people are sitting there home alone tonight, just watching some old game tape, trying to recover from the combine, what can they do, Dennis?
Well, what they can do is they can like and subscribe to the podcast. And then they can take the link and message it to two friends and have them like and subscribe to the podcast. We changed platforms a while back, lost a lot of subscribers. We need to build the subscriber base back up. Give us a rating and a review. We love that. We're going to have to maybe start pulling some and maybe give away some swag or something. I hate to bribe people, but I guess I'll do what I got to do.
You're a company man. You're gonna do it for the team. Well, that's going to do it for us today, but we'll be back on Friday looking at running backs, as I mentioned, and see how many more people can get the good old franchise.